dear listeners, now we know why Shakespeare split his Henry VIII play up like this. This man is so interesting, and I am aware of this because he's my babe. And his life had so many movers, shakers, and bad decision makers that we felt a third podcast episode was warranted, using the 6 wives of the infamous king as the suitable markers.
Now we've reached the third and final part of the reign of one of the most iconic monarchs of British and possibly even European history. Love him or hate him, you can never forget him, that's for sure. And the impact of some of his whims and decisions can still be felt today.
This week's episode also is a very special one for us, and we would like to make a dedication for this episode to a very special Henry who has very recently entered our lives. My actual sister and Carrie's sister from another mister, Mary, and her partner Gary, recently welcomed young Henry into the world, and we're dedicating this episode all about a historical namesake to him. I cannot wait to watch him grow and to teach him all about the weird and wonderful world of history, folklore would be more Carrie's side, mythology, and of course Harry Potter.
He's going to be a Slytherin. His mom's a Slytherin.
No, he's not.
He's going to be a Slytherin.
But he's got me, Auntie Maddie, and Uncle Luke as Hufflepuffs. Yeah, Auntie Carrie's a Slytherin. Uncle John is a Ravenclaw.
So he'll lean towards the darker side of things, which will be perfectly fine. And then, if he wanders off, you guys can go find him, because that's what Hufflepuffs do.
No. Oh, he is like the best thing in the whole entire world ever.
He's a little squidge.
Honestly, I just can't. And he's called Henry. And that's and I didn't even have any input in the name. He's not named after Henry VIII. I'm gonna say he's named after Henry VIII.
In our hearts we know it's Henry VIII.
In real life it's after Gary's granddad. But he
was a perfectly respectable Henry.
Yes, he was. But he's not Henry VIII.
No. And naturally, of course, as we celebrate new life, this week's episode comes complete with a ridiculous death.
Obviously.
And we learn that going with the crowd might not always be the best idea, especially when it involves projectiles.
So, take your groom of the stool, fill your goblet with wine, raise a toast to young Henry, and let's get historical.
First, a quick recap.
Sorry. Previously on a nice cup of fister tea.
Yep. Picture this, if you can. A montage at the start of a TV show episode. Music playing, like Carry On My Wayward Son in Supernatural, but the bardcore version, because we're in the 16th century. It's like bling, 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 ring. That kind of thing. A young baby is born. He starts to grow up. His brother dies. His mother dies. He argues with his father. His father dies. He becomes king. He marries his brother's widow. His grandmother dies. His infant son dies. He invades France. It doesn't go well. His forces fight back in Scotland. That does go well. He loses another baby. He has a daughter. He has a son by another woman. He loses another baby.
Then, plot twist. In comes another character from France. She charms him. He divorces his first wife, beheads 2 friends called Thomas, and elevates a third. He has another daughter. He meets another girl. He has a terrible accident and nearly dies. But he does. He loses another baby. He accuses his wife of bad stuff and she's executed. His bastard son dies. He marries the other woman, puts down a rebellion, loses a baby, then keeps a baby but loses a wife, goes mad for a while, gains weight, meets another woman who can't speak English and doesn't recognise him at first, which hurts his feelings. He divorces her, meets another woman and marries her, kills another Thomas. And now we are up to speed.
Add in some images of further campaigns in France, being called the Defender of the Faith, followed by monasteries being taken down, some more battles, the Field of the Cloth of Gold, building of palaces, some issues with his sister in Scotland and his sister in France, and then in Suffolk, and you'll have a full 60-second recap of the life of Henry VIII so far. Or maybe just go back and listen to the first 2 episodes. That is also an option.
That is, but I think we dramatically...
I think that was beautifully dramatic. Yeah.
It is 60 seconds of Henry VIII there.
With the whole bling, 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 bling in the background. A la Mortal Coil from Bill the Film.
Absolutely. Right, where we are picking up now, Henry has recently divorced his third wife, Anne of Cleves, and has married the roughly, nobody is quite sure of her date of birth, 18-year-old Catherine Howard. Henry himself had just turned 50 and has a weeping sore on his leg thanks to a jousting accident he had a few years before, which has limited his mobility and caused him to gain weight. That, mixed with what we would consider now as a poor diet, has led him to develop gout, and the head injury he sustained during that fateful joust had led to an impact on his already
Mercurial.
I malfunctioned personality, making him somewhat a paranoid and prone to bigger fits of rage. What we love from Henry VIII is more rage.
Yep.
Although the uprisings, betrayals, and insincere courtiers around him may also be a contributing factor there. For that recap, Henry had to deal with a lot during the first 2/3 of his reign.
He really did. He was.
Honestly, he did not have it easy. And everyone thinks, oh, Henry VIII was an ass.
I mean, he wasn't great. He had moments, but there were mitigating circumstances. He lost a lot. For one person, he lost a lot.
Yeah.
And he dealt with it the best way he could, but also bear in mind that he grew up being pretty much spoilt and never told no until it came to a stage where he was in a position where people had to tell him no.
Yeah.
And he didn't like it. His marriage to Catherine Howard, whilst probably a bit icky in our eyes, made political and personal sense at the time. Henry was now a father to 3 legitimate children, despite efforts at various points to change the statuses of those children, 2 daughters called Mary and Elizabeth, and a young son called Edward. But, as he knew with how he came to succeed the throne after the premature death of his older brother Arthur, one son just isn't enough. And the daughters couldn't inherit because, they're girls, and possibly illegitimate, but also not, but also maybe yes, depending on the time of year.
Catherine was young and vicarious. She revitalised the ageing king and helped him to smile again after a tumultuous year. And she was young, which meant that she was most likely fertile and had the time to bear many children, including the valuable sons. Henry lavished his new wife with many gifts and was, by all accounts, a very kind and caring husband to her.
This is one thing that David Starkey, eminent Tudor historian, rock star of the Tudor era.
Met him, got a signed picture.
Yes, fantastic talk he gave about the Reformation being the first British Brexit. It's brilliant. But one thing he actually said about Henry is that looking back through the sources in detail, he wasn't actually a bad husband. He was quite a kind, caring husband.
Yeah.
It just kind of went wrong.
Yeah.
Following the issues with the Pilgrimage of Grace, I think that qualifies as an issue.
It is a bit of an issue.
The North had not openly rebelled, but it was still grumbling away, and it was felt that the king and his new queen should take a tour of the northern part of the kingdom, hearing some petitions, and be a visible presence both as a conciliation and as a warning. It was also suggested that he would meet with the then King of Scotland and his nephew, James V, to discuss an alliance and the cessation of the endless border raids. Henry's sister, Margaret Tudor Stuart, had died earlier that year, so James had no real incentive to keep the original peace going, which is why it's sort of meeting might be a good idea. On the 16th of September, 1541, Henry and Catherine and their massive retinue arrived at the city of York for the meeting. But James V was a no-show.
That's not great.
It's not.
Annoyed but still determined to continue their progress, Henry and Catherine returned to Leconfield, where they had come from the purpose of checking on the fortifications at the important port of Hull. Seafaring was important to Henry, sensible considering he was the king of an island nation, and he had exponentially. What? That was so difficult. He had very much grown the Royal Navy from around 5 ships to upwards of 53, something that would come in very handy later with one of his daughters' Spanish Armada defeat. And it was a very big navy that comes with big threats of sea. That mixed with animosity with other countries and the ever-present threat from an annoyed Pope calling the Catholics together to give Henry a wee smacked bottom, then you can see why he might want to make sure the vulnerable parts of the country were defended.
They stayed in Hull for a short time, and then on the 6th of October 1541, the happy couple returned to London. Sadly, as can be said to be seen in the story of Henry, his happiness was not to last. I don't know what I did with that sentence there, but I made a sentence. It was not a grammatically correct sentence.
Oh, yeah, stop and speaking so good. We've been doing all the talk. Pretty good that we do a podcast.
Yeah, it's great.
Trust me, our book is better than this.
Yeah, it's more articulate. This is
better than we speak.
I think we've used up our word count for this half of the year, really.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. A few short weeks later, Henry was taking Mass on the Feast of All Souls' Day, which is celebrated by Christians on the 2nd of November, and when a letter arrived for him from Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, that's the Archbishop who declared his marriage to Catherine of Aragon annulled following the break with Rome, which her daughter Mary would later make him pay for. The letter both incensed and devastated Henry, as it detailed the infidelity of his wife, Queen Catherine. We do have a disclaimer now. The next part has allusions to sexual assault of a minor and graphic descriptions of an execution.
Initially, Henry refused to believe the tale that he... Sorry, my cat came in again. Initially, Henry refused to believe the tale he was being told, that she had, whilst in the care of her guardian, Viscountess Rochford, been exposed to the ministrations of the older men and had carried this one even after her marriage to the king. Due to the seriousness of the charges and the fact the adultery against the king was treason, it threw into question the validity of any heirs produced. He had to act and the queen was questioned. To Henry's shock, but probably nobody else's, she confessed. She named Frances Derham, former secretary to her grandmother and guardian, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk, and Thomas Culpeper, a member of the Privy Chamber and therefore close to the king. There was now only one course of action.
Sorry, we got slightly distracted there because we had an errant cat come in, followed by John the cat catcher, who just cameoed in the background, chasing this kitten around the living room.
I tried my best.
You did try. It was a funny sight. Catherine was formally charged with treason, and she was arrested at Hampton Court Palace. Legend has it that when the guards came for her, Catherine managed to break free, slipping past them and running down the long corridor towards the Chapel Royal, where Henry was at Mass, screaming and pleading for mercy. It is said that her ghost can now be encountered in this part of Hampton Court, now known as the Haunted Gallery in her honour, running and screaming towards the end of the gallery, and the temperature is known to drop significantly there.
Following her arrest, Catherine was exiled to Sarn House under the Treason Act of 1534. Her lover and former lovers, Frances Derham and Thomas Culpeper, along with Henry Manox, who was her music teacher in her childhood, was arrested on the grounds of malicious intent and sent to the Tower. It was alleged that she had been in a relationship with Henry Manox while he was her teacher, bearing in mind she was around 11 or 12 at the time, and then had moved on to ongoing sexual relationship with Frances Derham, in which they were known to refer to each other as husband and wife. That alone would suggest to pre-contract and technically a marriage in the eyes of the church, making her marriage to Henry invalid. Not to mention the fact that she was not a virgin. It was also alleged that during her marriage to Henry, she had begun and maintained a sexual relationship with Thomas Culpeper. The men were then questioned by Cranmer's men.
Manox admitted that he had tried to seduce the Queen whilst he was her music teacher, and that they had been discovered by the Dowager Duchess kissing and were banned from being alone together. This didn't deter him, and he confessed to having had sexual contact with her, though not to having outright sex with her. Manox was released, as what he had done wasn't technically adultery, even though it was inappropriate and gross. Derham and Culpeper were not so lucky. They were both interrogated, and it was revealed, and supported by confession from Catherine, that Derham and she had been in a physical relationship, and that she had also begun a relationship, though it seems of a more mutually consensual nature, with Culpeper after arriving at court and continuing after her marriage to the king. The guilt of the two lovers and the young queen was beyond doubt, and they were all charged with treason.
On the 10th of December 1541, Catherine Howard, Thomas Culpeper and Frances Derham were all executed for treason. The sentence for high treason for the men was to be hanged, drawn and quartered, though the king commuted the sentence for Culpeper to just beheading, decreeing that Derham deserved no mercy. Whether this was because of his affection for Catherine and knowing that she in turn genuinely cared for Culpeper, and they both alleged never having actually slept together, or for the knowledge that Derham had taken his pleasure from the Queen without her consent, we may never know. Henry's love for Catherine had by this point turned to hate and hurt, but it did not mean that he was without some compassion.
Culpeper was beheaded at Tyburn, using that place instead of Tower Hill to make a public example of him. Derham followed, and he was hanged, castrated, which lent credence to the punishment for the non-consent theory, disemboweled, beheaded, and quartered. With a skilled executioner, it's likely that he survived and was at least semi-conscious up to and including part of the disembowelment. The heads of the two men were dipped in tar and then displayed upon spikes along London Bridge, along with other traitors, including Thomas Cromwell.
It's put in this in Catherine Howard's song in 6, is it?
Well, no, no, especially not the fact that that Derham essentially,
I mean,
yeah,
it's alluded that she was really young.
yeah, she was
When she
young.
says I was 13 going on 30.
Yeah,
So it's alluded in the song that it wasn't right.
yeah. The thing was that Dirham apparently came to her bed in the dorm that they were in. So there were other people around, so it wasn't discreet. And he would either be in just his shirt and his hose, or he'd be completely naked, and he would do it without her consent.
Yeah.
Kind of dancing around the word without saying the word.
Yes.
Yeah. So that punishment is not mentioned in that happy-go-lucky song.
No. Amazing. Like when you see it on stage,
Yeah.
how it's performed, horrendous. So good.
Really.
Yeah. Catherine was next, with her execution being carried out in a much more private way at the Tower of London. She was not put on trial, but her confession and the evidence of others was enough to convict her outright. Henry signed an act of retainer condemning her to death, and at 9 a.m. on the 13th of February 1542, she and the accomplice of her misdeeds, the Viscountess Rochford, ironically enough the widow of George Boleyn, who had accused him and Anne of incest way back in the day, was beheaded at the Tower of London. She is buried near Anne Boleyn and Thomas More in the chapel of St. Peter Vernacular, St. Peter in Chains, at the Tower. After only 18 months of marriage, Henry was once again a widower. I wonder if Anna Cleves was looking so bad after all.
Yeah, he's probably second guessing his decision there, wasn't
And
he?
isn't it said that I will get this wrong? But wasn't it said that Catherine's last words were, "I'd rather die a wife of Culpeper"?
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the
I don't
legends
want to
around
die
it.
as a queen. I would rather die as the wife of Culpeper.
And it was strongly believed that if Henry had died, she would have married Culpeper. So that there was a genuine affection there, and I think that's kind of why Henry showed sort of mercy in the way that he died.
Yeah.
Maybe. Henry, once again by this point, was single and ready to mingle. He set to work trying to find another wife, but other events in 1542 soon took his attention away from the marriage mart. On 21st of October 1542, Thomas Howard, the Duke of Norfolk and uncle to now 2 beheaded queens, led a raid into Scotland that lasted only 4 days and retreated because his troops had run out of beer.
I mean,
So
beer's good.
yes,
I get
legitimate reason. Yeah.
James V was not best pleased, though, and on the 24th of November he retaliated. The Battle of Solway Moss resulted where James was ambushed by a waiting English force. The land where the battle was pitched was swampy, and the English forces knew the terrain better, giving them the advantage. The Scots tried to flee, but were trapped, and around 1,000 men were captured, along with 3,000 horses, 30 standards, the flags denoting the regiments and who they belonged to, which would have been a massive blow to morale, and 20 guns. This was, in no uncertain terms, a disaster for the Scots.
Further trouble followed for Henry's northern neighbours as, whilst travelling with his pregnant wife Marie de Guise to Falkland Palace, James V took ill. Marie, who had remained at Linlithgow Palace for her lying-in, or labour, gave birth to a young daughter. The news reached the Scottish king at Falkland, by now on his deathbed, and on 14th of December 1542, aged 30, James V of Scotland died.
It's really young.
It was really young. Incidentally, he was the last monarch to die in Scotland until the 8th of September 2022, when Elizabeth II died at Balmoral Castle in Aberdeenshire, just shy of 480 years later. His daughter became queen at only 6 days old, becoming Mary Queen of Scots.
Whilst this was going on, Henry and his advisors were looking back at old alliances and overtures were made to build a friendship back with the Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor. His deal with France had gone sour, and on the 11th of February 1543, Henry and Charles signed a treaty and organised a joint invasion of France, with a force being sent to Calais that June. Meanwhile, Henry was attempting to secure a treaty with the now politically vulnerable Scotland called the Treaty of Greenwich, which applied that when monarchs of both countries could not actively try to hurt one another, and proposed the marriage of Henry's son, Prince Edward, to the infant Queen Mary when she came of age.
Seemed pretty sensible.
That makes sense.
Yep. Things in France did not go to plan, and the treaties of Greenwich were soon after rejected by the Scottish Parliament in December 1543, with them renewing what was called the Old Alliance with France, making them de facto enemies of the English once again, and terminating any talk of a marriage pact between Edward and Mary.
It wasn't just his son's marriage on his mind, however, and in 1543 Henry began to look for his now sixth wife. Now in his 50s, nearly morbidly obese and being followed by a constant stench of rotting flesh from his unhealed leg wound, Henry knew that his time was soon to be drawing to a close. As much as a spare to the heir was needed, he also wanted a companion to care for him.
Enter Catherine Parr, stage right. At this point, Parr was already twice widowed, being known when she met Henry as the Lady Latimer. She had begun a romantic entanglement with Thomas Seymour, brother to Henry's third wife, Jane, which was interesting as Catherine herself was named after Henry's first wife, Catherine of Aragon. At this point, these connections are more of a web than a line and would look like that meme of the conspiracy theorist trying to explain it all.
The one with the picture on the wall and all the like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, both she and Jane Seymour are two of Henry's queens that if you try and internet search them, you get directed to modern day actresses.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting when you try and research.
It is. I enjoy that. Catherine was well read, highly educated, religious, and accomplished. Her mother had been close to Queen Catherine, and Catherine Parr had, in turn, become close to Henry's oldest daughter Mary, becoming part of her household. It was through this connection that she came to Henry's attention. Despite their feelings for one another, Thomas Seymour urged Catherine to pursue a chance with the king, and when it finally came, she accepted the king's proposal.
On 12th of July 1543, at the Chapel Royal in Hampton Court Palace, Henry was married a sixth and final time, and Catherine Parr was crowned queen. At this point, Henry had also adopted the title of King of Ireland into his list, and that made Catherine the first Queen of England and Ireland. Catherine and Henry's marriage started out well, with the two getting along, and Catherine even managing to successfully reconcile the aging king with his two daughters, Mary and Elizabeth. Catherine oversaw and took part in the education of Elizabeth and the young Prince Edward. While she did not produce an heir for him, Catherine did what only Jane before her had managed to come close to. She reunited Henry with his family.
Parr was more than just a mother and a teacher, though. She was also a writer, and her book, Psalms or Prayers, taking out of Holy Scriptures, was printed by the king's own printer in April 1544, meaning that Henry was in support of her endeavours. The work was a translation of Latin work by Bishop John Fisher from 1525, published anonymously as she was still a woman, which meant that she was able to speak Latin, adding to her educational prowess.
And not only able to speak Latin, but able to speak it to a level where she could translate it into English.
Which is amazing.
When Henry went on campaign to France in July 1544, staying on the continent until that September, he left Catherine behind as his regent, and in the event that he should die in battle, she was to remain as regent until Edward came of age to rule alone. Catherine managed well whilst Henry was away, and even found time to create a second book, Prayers and Meditations, which she would go on to publish the following year. As a Christmas gift that year, the Princess Elizabeth translated Catherine's second work into Latin, Italian, and French, creating a hand-embroidered cover for the manuscript, which you can see in the British Library, and they've also made a digitised version so you can see it online, and showcased her own innate talent for languages, much like her mother and her final stepmother.
That's ridiculous. That's so clever.
That's one thing a lot of people say about Elizabeth, is that she was really good with languages. She could speak at least 3 or 4.
That's crazy. Catherine petitioned Henry, along with some of his more supportive chancellors, to look to the line of succession, and, as he had only one male heir and no spare had been forthcoming at that point, it was agreed that Mary and Elizabeth would be restored to the line of succession, and their third act of succession was passed in 1544. This meant that Edward was a direct heir, followed by any children he might have, followed by any son that Henry and Catherine might then have, then followed by the son's children, and then, if things went horribly wrong and they all died, Mary's children, and then Elizabeth. This was pretty groundbreaking, as a woman had not been in line to inherit since Henry I had attempted to pass the throne to his daughter Matilda, which led to a period called the Anarchy, which was a civil war between 1138 and 1153 and ended with the start of the Plantagenet dynasty.
Henry's campaign in France was a bit of a mixed bag, with success in September 1544 at the Siege of Boulogne, ending in their surrender and the destruction of the castle there. They basically reduced the castle they pretty much blew it up. Henry rode in triumph into the town on the 18th of September, but soon returned to England under the threat of a significant reprisal from the French. It didn't help that his previous ally, Charles V, had reached a peace agreement with France, allowing King Francis to focus the full force of his military against the English. Henry wisely realised the odds and returned home to his wife and somewhat secure kingdom.
Whilst raised Catholic, Catherine had developed sympathies towards the new religion in England and her faith was devout. However, as with all queens, she had enemies and they started to whisper that she was Protestant and a reformer. At this time, while still the head of the Church of England, Henry's views on religions had started to lean back towards a more Catholic ideal, especially after his reconciliation with Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor. Catherine's enemies then saw this as a chance to be rid of her and started to turn the king against her, drawing his attention instead to Catherine Brandon, Duchess of Suffolk, second wife of his close friend and one-time brother-in-law Charles Brandon, who had died earlier that year in 1545, same year that the Mary Rose sank.
An arrest warrant was drawn up for Catherine on charges of heresy, but she was clever. Where her predecessor Catherine Howard had failed, Catherine Parr was able to speak to Henry and appeal to him. She was charged with heresy after attempting to have certain books banned and causing an argument with the king around religion. Catherine threw herself to her knees in front of the king and reasoned with him that she was only attempting to cause a religious argument with the king so that he would then teach her about the true religion and impart his incredible knowledge and wisdom to her poor, feeble mind, whilst also taking his mind off the pain and suffering that his by now fully ulcerous leg was causing him.
Surprisingly, this plea worked, playing both to his ego and his need for care and affection, and the warrant was cancelled. Nobody told the King's Chancellor Thomas
Wriothesley.
Thank you.
It's a weirdly spelled one.
Though, and the next day he tried to arrest the Queen while she was out walking with the King, in what we can only imagine was an incredibly embarrassing scene for
Thomas.
And anyone else who witnessed it. The King publicly
Told him off.
dismissed him from his services.
Yeah, the second-hand embarrassment for that moment must have been intense.
Oh, honestly.
The wheels of politics continued to turn, and following the signing of a peace treaty known as the Peace of Ard between England and France in June 1546, it was agreed that England would keep the town of Boulogne for 8 years. Not sure why 8, but it was a victory. Meanwhile, in December, Henry's cousin and one of the most influential men in the kingdom below him, Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, was arrested for treason along with his son Henry, Earl of Surrey. This removed them from power and life, but mostly removed them from the chance to challenge Catherine as regent after Henry's death. Both father and son were executed in January 1547, Surrey on the 19th of January and Norfolk on the 28th of January.
Which is sad because Norfolk done a lot throughout Henry's reign for him.
He did, but his death came on an auspicious day for Henry as well.
Mm-hmm. His final act, after a lifetime of turmoil, extravagance, paranoia, combat, loss, and love, was to see off Norfolk as, also on the 28th of January 1547, Henry VIII died. His son Edward would succeed him as king and reign until his death on the 6th of July 1553 due to tuberculosis. The same illness that claimed his father would eventually claim his son. Edward died without any children, and so, as per the Act of Succession, the throne passed to his eldest daughter Mary, who reigned for 5 years and attempted to bring England back under Catholic rule, thanks to a marriage to King Philip II of Spain, and her own Catholic beliefs. It was a brief but bloody reign, and sadly, despite a number of phantom pregnancies, she failed to produce an heir and died of suspected cancer in 1558, aged 42. Her younger sister Elizabeth took over and led England to its first and only golden age to date. Though her reign wasn't without its difficulties, while she never married and saw out the end of the Tudor era, Elizabeth was very much her father's daughter in many ways.
There was also the slight blip of Lady Jane Grey in there, but considering she only reigned for 9 days,
Yeah.
and technically was, but also wasn't a Tudor.
Yeah.
After all of the pain, tears, effort, and executions trying to get an heir and secure his legacy, it would eventually be his daughter who made the biggest mark on the Tudor dynasty after his death, and who ended his direct line. Love him or hate him, Henry certainly looms large in the European consciousness as a king of action. Whilst not remembered as the glorious battle monarch and King Arthur 2.0 he might have wanted to be, he is nonetheless remembered, and with him the people who fell in and out of his orbit, in the most spectacular ways. R.I.P. Henry.
He's great. Honestly.
I mean, you are ever so slightly biased.
Henry VIII is my historical bae.
He is, and you can't deny he was a clever sod.
Mm-hmm. If he'd never had that jousting accident, and if Anne Boleyn,
Or if their son had survived, his son with Catherine had survived, we probably wouldn't have remembered any of the others except maybe his mistresses or ladies in waiting.
maybe Henry Fitzroy would be known, but that'd be it.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's insane, isn't it?
Ain't it though? Historical what ifs. Almost as annoying as history mysteries.
Oh, history mysteries are...
They hurt my brain. I hate them.
Yeah.
Because the chances of ever figuring them out is slim to none.
Not mentioning any names, Princes in the Tower.
I dislike not completion.
Yeah. It's... Yeah. There's just... so many question marks. That's why I love them, because you can really dig into them and find out and
But
find.
you don't know
different
which
people's
one is the
stories.
truth, though.
Oh, you'll never know the truth.
And that annoys me.
But the finding out. Sorry, the adventure. I just hiccuped. I said, what? The finding out, the adventure. That's the fun part, right?
No.
Oh, fair.
So, as always, the end. Do you have a random fact for us this day?
I shall think of a random fact.
Carrie's random fact.
Henry VIII, we established in the podcast that his nephew was Charles V, a nephew through Queen Catherine of Aragon. As a gift, he once gave him 400 pet dogs.
400.
400.
One dog, some people see, is an inconvenience. 400.
400. And they're attack dogs, so they were like battle dogs. So they were like, think of like Ramsay Bolton's hounds.
400 dogs.
In a very large kennel.
Carrie's random fact.
Okay, so, have you ever had one of those days
Yes.
when nothing seems to go right?
Yes.
And it's just that moment where just one little thing is just gonna make it all tear.
Yeah.
And you're gonna drop your toast on the floor and just basically have a meltdown.
I had that with noodle soup.
Yeah.
I was well looking forward to this noodle soup. And I was pouring it from the saucepan into the bowl, and the saucepan slipped out of my hand and into the bowl of soup, and the bowl broke and the soup went all over the floor. I literally just stood and sobbed. I couldn't be doing my life.
Well, imagine if your bad day turned fatal.
Right.
This happened in July 1507, where a fella named John Kay was out shooting arrows on an arrow range. These kind of things happen. But there was a really strong wind blowing that day. And as he fired his arrow, the wind kind of caught it off.
Blew it off course.
Yeah, blew it off course. And it shot into a large group of people, where one Mr. William Shaw was just minding his own business in a group of people, and then all of a sudden an arrow came out of nowhere and struck him in the forehead. I mean,
that is a bad day.
If you
just mind your own business and suddenly arrow.
If there's ever a case of fuck him in particular,
right?
I mean, and as well, like, it's bad enough that the arrow hits, but being in a crowd of people and being the one that it hits,
that's ridiculous.
That is. You have my sympathies there, William Shaw. Life sucked for you until it didn't. Ridiculous death.
Ridiculous. Wow. We're done with Henry VIII.
We're done. We are done.
3 episodes in and we are done with Henry VIII. I'm really sad, but...
I mean, we'll never be officially done with Henry VIII. There will always be something. And
there always will be.
We'll come back and we'll circle round to, like, his wives or his kids
and
or
we
something.
absolutely will be, but... We're done, Henry VIII.
But you know what that means?
What?
It means it's October!
And it is spooky month.
Ooh.
And we've got some proper good episodes planned.
We have.
For you. Hopefully we will get them all done. We have just been cast in a pantomime. Volunteer players.
What?
Carrie is playing an amazing
Autumn Queen.
Yes. And I am playing the silly Billy character, Olaf, not the snowman. I'm going to disappoint so many kids.
Do you want to build a snowman?
No, I'm not that Olaf. They're going to be like, it's a Snow Queen. It's a Frozen adventure. I'm going to come on, Olaf, Kids are going to literally hate me.
Do you
'Cause I'm
even
not a
have a
snow
carrot?
Ice cream seller.
Well, okay.
But that is all good. We're going to get these ones done,
Yes.
and we're hoping to go and revisit something that we promised to do 3 years ago.
Yes. We promised to do a shuck hunting for black shuck, but genuinely, the weather was too nice, which was a weird thing to say at the end of October. The weather was too nice.
So we're going to keep an eye out throughout October, and the day that we are free and the weather is fine, we are foxtrot osking to hunt black shuck.
We want
Hopefully.
it drizzly and foggy and blech.
Yes, because that's the perfect time to go down a really scary country road.
It's not cold. I wouldn't want it to be cold.
But we're going to be in a car.
This is a valid point. What could go wrong?
Everything. So on that note, we're going to go.
Yep.
And we'll be back with Spooky October.
Yes. We're not going to tell you what the other episodes are.
Oh, absolutely not.
So it's going to be fun though. Bye.